Good morning, everyone. Very good to see you here and see some familiar faces. So I'm going to, it's really great to get Mark's initial address, and I hope that some of the things that I talk about will take up some of the points that he's already made. So what I want to talk about is educational initiatives in the churchyard. I'll come on to exactly what kind of occasioned that as we go through. We're near to the beginning of the first lockdown. In addition to the day job, I was given the task of being priest in charge of St John's, Crowborough, which is here. I have to say, as far as churchyards are concerned, having spent most of my ministry in London and Oxford, I've been in charge of a garden of remembrance before, but that's about it. So I am really rather an arriviste in this area, and I kind of defer to Mark's authority on that. But we do have a churchyard, and I will talk about the educational part of it shortly. So anyway, does anybody know who this character is on the right? Tell us. Yeah, exactly. Mark Hill, Chancellor of the Diocese, and this is his very good book on ecclesiastical law, which is on my I can actually recommend it to everyone, with the slight drawback that if you look on Amazon, then the price is about £150. But it's a fascinating read, actually, much more than might appear. And I suppose that over the last 6 years, part of my interaction with churchyards has often been on the rather kind of some of the sort of things that we've been hearing about, and the rather more kind of traumatic aspects, like, you know, who's going to get permission for what kind of inscription or design on a grave, and those sort of contested matters, which have often made churchyards seem actually rather kind of difficult and tricky and contested places. And so that's why I've actually been very glad to have responsibility for a churchyard myself and seen the positive side of it. Indeed, we've actually got a group in the parish called the Pyromaniacs, who about once a month do work in the churchyard. And this rather relates to something that Mark was saying. It's a group of people who go to church, and some others, and they get together on Saturday mornings once a month or so and do a whole load of work, and then at the end of the day have a fire and they have refreshments and things. And it's actually something that sort of draws in people in quite remarkable ways. There are quite a few people who are actually really interested in doing that, and it's become a little sort of network of its own. Anyway, so Mark Hill in his ecclesiastical law book, and I think just to sort of get the archdeacon bit over and done with, people complain about the faculty jurisdiction, of course, but I think the important thing is that when there are difficult decisions to be made about things like inscriptions on gravestones and what kind of stones are allowed, the use of the faculty system, in a sense, is that it takes these things away from people locally, and people can hate the Chancellor of the Diocese as much as they want. It's not going to really affect him very much, but what we don't want is them hating the PCC and the incumbent. And so the point of it is that when there are that when it comes to authorising things, those decisions get taken away from local level, and I think that does have a benefit, that it means that people locally don't get the unpopularity. Anyway, when COVID struck, we've got a really good church school practically next door to the church, and of course, I bore anyone with my views about school closures in the break, if you can be bothered to ask me. But I felt so sorry for the year 6 pupils, that they used to have year 6 normally has a whole kind of programme of school journeys and tours and all the rest of it, and it just all got cancelled. So I thought, well, what can we do? And we've got our churchyard, perhaps we can, and the church, and perhaps we can actually design some activities for them, given that so much has been taken away from them. And so we had, for the Year 6 pupils, and this is really what I want to mainly tell you about, the way it was designed was that there were 3 sessions, 2 half days and then one kind of longer session was the idea. And the 2 half days were basically a science, so we sort of swapped it round so that in the morning you did one thing and then in the afternoon you did the other. So we had a science session and a history of the churchyard session over one day, and then we got on to constructing the forest school or forest church on the other day. So the science activities, I'm going to the science session, I'm going to sort of go over these more quickly because I'm not a scientist and I wasn't particularly involved with them. Other people in the congregation did those. But we do have on the piano there is a little brochure that the person who organised these has put together. And so if you're interested, please do take one away with you. But the sort of things that there were well, as you can see, observation of wildlife, recording of types of trees and plants and animals, identifying of skeletal remains, food webs, food chains, who eats whom, taking samples from the soil and recording pH and so on. So there are lots of science activities that can quite easily be done, and there's more in the brochure. And one of the... who can identify this person here? There we are. Okay. Anyone? So, okay, that's Richard Dawkins, of course. Who? And so, why have I got him? And I think the reason is because he and the other so-called new atheists have set up this very polarised opposition between science and religion. You've got those two things, as he would portray it, in completely opposite camps. And I think one of the things that actually is quite important for us to do as the church is to kind of give a message to say we're not actually anti-science. You know, the world, the earth is the Lord's and all that therein is. We're interested in science. We endorse it, and in this particular set of activities, we want to encourage and promote it, and to hopefully give those children a message that the church is not actually anti-science, and this is and the sort of thing that he puts out is actually a complete caricature. So I hope. Well, I don't know whether that message was conveyed to children in Year 6 of St John's School, but I hope that subliminally it might have been. And I think in any case, those science activities, they absolutely loved them. Things like, making bug hotels and things like that. They really enjoyed them. And we've heard a lot about the things like the biodiversity of churchyards already. There's just, they are incredibly rich. At St John's, I suppose other people will know about this better than I do, but I think it's just because they've had kind of low, sort of a small amount of kind of maintenance and interference. Therefore, we have these very rare breeds of flowers and orchids and so on that have been allowed to grow, and it does make it a very special and diverse environment. So I think that there's plenty to do with the school group around all of that. Obviously, there needs to be somebody who knows about it and is confident to do it. But I think it's just all there, kind of waiting. And I should actually say, compared with some of the churchyards of parishes represented here, St John's is only, it was built in the 1860s, so it's not a very ancient churchyard. And this is more, so I think in more ancient ones, there's probably even greater biodiversity and so on. So that was the first bit, the science section of it, and then the second thing they did was this history. It was really about the history and spirituality of the churchyard, and that was the one that I was more directly involved with. And we did we gave them a sort of initial exercise to go and find out things. So we said, could you just go around the churchyard and try to find the earliest date you can find on a gravestone, an old person, a young person, somebody with an unusual name, somebody who's been buried within the last 10 years. And so they went round and sort of had a look and took some notes, which I think was an important part of it, really, because it wasn't just me or my colleague kind of standing there and telling them things. That they did a kind of finding out exercise. And then I'll just sort of take you quite quickly through the next slides. So one or two of the children in the school remembered this lady who was buried there. So that was quite a good thing. This is an extraordinary thing which they in the church school they know about. That this girl she's not actually, I don't think, buried in the churchyard. I don't think, but there's a memorial to her, and there's Alice Hemsley, she was warming herself by the fire in the large room where her clothes caught fire. She was coming out of the school enveloped in flames when the master saw her, who at once rushed out and tried his utmost to extinguish the flames. But the fire had got such complete hold of all her clothes, it was very difficult to subdue her. So there's this report in the school logbook from 1882, and it's something that they kind of knew about already, that they could see her memorial. And I think in every churchyard there are these sort of stories that are going to be of interest. And you can, and so I think if one's doing something, then sort of finding something. Given that all children are sort of inherently pyromaniacs, anything that involves contact with fire is a good, I think always good. But whatever it is, I think to sort of look out for what are going to be the. I think probably to look for not try to do too many things, but just look for sort of 5 or 6 things that are really going to be of interest and that you can talk about and that are going to engage them would be what I would suggest. The Sisters of Bethany, they came from the East End of London, and they had a house in Crowborough and when the sisters who had lung conditions when they were unwell, they would be sent to the pure upland air in Crowborough. So there they are, the Sisters of Bethany, and they've got a sort of they've got a memorial. Some of them are buried in our churchyard, and they've got a memorial there. So they were another one we focused on. And then, yes, the Ramsbothams, who were basically local landowners. They came originally from Lancashire and very generous benefactors of the church. So they were quite interesting. And also, I think another quite good link was that there are quite a lot of Ramsbotham windows in the church and other things. The reredos, I think, was donated by one of the families, so they could kind of make links between their memorials in the churchyard and other memorials actually in the church. So another thing that was that kind of worked quite well. They had done some work on it in the school, but just because of the use of Roman numerals to do a little exercise on that. Then I think sort of moving on from the sort of history lesson part of it. We've got a couple of in the congregation who's they're sort of late 40s, I suppose, mid to late 40s, and their daughter had cerebral palsy and died at a very young age. And her ashes are buried in the churchyard. So I got the group. I thought probably we just need to have sort of sit down and have some spiritual time. So it's 15 in each of the two groups, and so they kind of sat around the grave. I asked Olivia's mum if she wanted to come and talk about her daughter, and that was too painful for her. So she wrote this lovely piece about her daughter, and so I got the children sitting round and just sort of quietened everyone down and read this out to them about Olivia, and I think tried to. I mean, Mark has dealt with this really well already, but I think tried to convey a sense that the churchyard isn't just about history and things that are in the past. Of course, it is partly about that, but it's also a living place where people go to pray and be still and to remember and grieve and ask the sort of questions that we've been hearing about. In this case, a question about why why would God allow a young girl to die at a very young age? All of those sort of things, and I think actually, I mean, I think they were interested in the historical things, and that did go well. But actually, reading what the children wrote afterwards, actually that was the highlight for them, as they just listened to a mother's account of her daughter in the churchyard, and I think did get a sense of it as a spiritual and reflective place. Okay. After that, we went back into church, and we had a look at. This is, I think, one of my favourite paintings, really, that some of you would be familiar with, by Stanley Spencer. His painting of the resurrection in Cookham Churchyard, and there's the church in Cookham, which is his parish church, and his painting of the resurrection, which is an extraordinary painting, really, where he has different people who would have been familiar from the village coming out of their graves. So, for example, his wife here. So he sort of went through various others. He did a portrait of himself lying in two stones that looked like a book, because he was always reading. And various other people that people would recognise, these two girls, one of whom used to go and visit a dead friend, and he was thinking how wonderful it would be when they were kind of reunited at the resurrection. So, so I think, today is on mission in the churchyard, and so I think it is important to think also about the theological significance of the things that we are dealing with, and I think that so I think that an emphasis on the Christian hope of the resurrection, of our hope for a life that lies beyond death, and the way that this is expressed in a particular way in Stanley Spencer's painting. But I think that we need we need to emphasise that, I think, and not forget about that part. And so, given that they've been thinking about churchyard, about various other aspects of the churchyard, I thought that would be a good place to conclude with thinking about the hope of the resurrection, and also, I suppose on another level, about churchyards as a sort of place where there is a community of the living and the dead, and everybody is everybody in a sense is together. One of our church wardens, for example, her husband is buried in the churchyard, and so I think there is that obviously with ancient churchyards that will be less the case, but with open ones there is that quite sort of tangible sense, and that that when people that we believe in the resurrection of the body, when people have died, that's not just it. There is a hope for the resurrection. So I thought it was probably important to, in addition to the history and spirituality of the churchyard, to sort of cover a bit of kind of doctrinal stuff, and that was, well, Stanley Spencer was my way into it. Okay, so that was really the end of that session, and then the third part was, it's really, I have to pay tribute to Brendan, who's going to be later on, because I was going up to his parish to talk about a bit of glebe land where there was some ferocious negotiation going on, and I saw the forest churches that he's made there, and I got real kind of forest church envy from this, and I thought we've got to have one of those as quickly as possible. And so the other thing that I thought would be good with this, given this time with the children in the school, would be actually to get them to help to construct it. And so that was the more kind of active part of what they were doing, was to help set this up. It's Brendan will give you far more about this, but anyway, there it is, and so they set it up, and then the hope is, which I think it will happen, that both the school and the Sunday school will be able to will use it, and it will just be a resource for them in the future if they want to do outdoor lessons and so on. And of course, during the COVID pandemic, there was quite a demand for doing stuff outdoors, so that sort of hit that particular need. But I hope that that will be something that is ongoing, and I think it will be. And this area is, you can't really see it from there, but it kind of looks out onto the church, so it's a bit of churchyard which is quite connected with the church. And I think it is interesting that once these sort of spaces get constructed, then people do sort of think of new and different uses for them. So, for example, this Lent, somebody's gone and stuck up these Stations of the Cross, just posters of it, around trees in this area, which wasn't something that I particularly anticipated and thought of. But I think that people are very ingenious, and once it's there, then I think they think, well, how can we? It naturally occurs to people to think of how they might use it. So that was the other part of what they're doing, and we thought of it in terms of being a kind of like a leaver's gift to the school in the future, that they would set this area up, and then it would be able to be used by future generations of children. Good. I think just to finish, I was at a talk the other day about the importance of re-enchantment of the world, and that in the hands of people like Richard Dawkins, maybe I might be being slightly unfair to him actually, but in kind of modern times, the world has become sort of unenchanted and just seen as in a sort of utilitarian way. And I do think, and this takes up on some of the things that I think Mark expressed very well, that I do think that this sort of activity in the outdoors, looking at the wonders of nature, the wonders of history, spirituality, the hope of resurrection, I think that it kind of gives us a chance to sort of to re-enchant these areas, and that seems to me to be a wonderful thing that we can do for children. So I'm hoping, as I say, I am a bit of an Ariviste in this area, and this is a programme that we have run only once. I hope we will do it again this summer. Well, we intend to do it again this summer. But I think that it seemed to me to kind of give so much opportunity, and to have a sort of naturalness about it in terms of all the other things that we're trying to do as a parish church, and also actually it's all there. If you have a churchyard, everything is there already. So in terms of preparation, obviously with all of these things there are things like health and safety assessments and those kind of things that you have to do. But actually, in terms of preparation, there are normally people with the expertise and skills to do it, and so it wasn't sort of terribly heavy on preparation in the way that some things can be. Good. Right. It's 11 o'clock, so we are due to have a coffee break. If we just have 2 minutes, if there are any kind of burning questions, and then people are very welcome to come and ask anything they've got in the break. Anything that anyone just immediately... Yeah.
Can I just make a comment, picking up a bit on Stanley Spencer, a little bit on what you were talking about churchyards. About 20 years ago in Berkshire, we had a fate because of the churchyard. There were these issues, of course it was pre-social media, but what was wonderful was that we had the Punch and Judy man in the churchyard. And he thought this was marvellous, because he said this is where Punch and Judy men used to be. And of course it gave him the children loved it. The character of Skellybones took on a wonderful new significance. And there was a sense actually that this was a show for the living and for the dead. I think probably Punch and Judy's are not PC anymore. But it seems to me, and the other wonderful thing which I have to say is that he said to me, you will never find a Punch and Judy set of characters with the punch, because all the old professors were buried with their Mr. Punch. And I thought, what a wonderful idea that it was as if, but it seemed that Punch and Judy would work well. Yeah. If we've got a Punch and Judy. Yeah. So you seem a bit uneasy.
No.
I'm not uneasy. I mean, I found it very sad, the story from Upfield about all of that stuff, because you think, well, how can, seeing a group of children having a story told to them, how could this be disrespectful? And I think it's very, very hard when you get trolled and all the rest of it. But I do think we have to kind of take the fight back a little bit and say, well, actually, it's not. These things are not disrespectful, and this is a community of the living and the departed. We're together in it, of course, with recent burials. We'll respect that, but actually that doesn't mean that the whole place has got to be a kind of mausoleum in the most sort of solemn sense.
Well, thank you very, very much. Just to explain, what was really heartening, I thought in particular, I was just amazed at the variety of education opportunities that actually already exist in the churchyard. But also the fact that Archdeacon Edwards said that this was new territory for him personally as well as the church, but that sense of having a go and just being encouraged to be able to do that. Sometimes just taking that step in a new initiative is significant, but actually, it's brilliant that you've done that and you're an example of it. So thank you very much indeed.